Hello and welcome to this week's Focus on Geothermal Energy for the Weekend webinar with ThinkG Energy and Enerchange. I'm incredibly pleased to present to you today Ahmas Yuniarto. Pak Ahmad is, for many people, in particular in Indonesia and internationally, they know him with his passionate work on geothermal as part of the INAGA, the Indonesian Geothermal Association, and his work on geothermal at the University of Gajah Mada in Yogyakarta, but also in recent years his role as president director of PT Pertamina Geothermal Energy. But of course, Pak Ahmad has a huge background and as a fellow passionate geothermalist and with incredible insights, and who's seen him in Indonesia presenting on various topics, will be as excited as I am today to present Ahmad. Ahmad, with that, I hand over to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Alex, thank you. Thank you. Alex, it's been a while since we met each other directly, right? So we wait for you and we'll serve you a geothermal coffee here in Indonesia, Alex, once again. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. And today, what I'm talking about, it might not be specific about geothermal, but that's based on my experience in running a geothermal business and observing the industry as well, sort of like thinking out loud what should be the approach that we all in the geothermal industry adopt beyond ESG. So I'll take you to meet Baron de Montesquieu from around the 1700 centuries. We all know from his thought on trias politica and also separation of power, right? Executive, judicative, and legislative. But also that around that time, he has a thinking, he formulated a thinking that the most powerful empire of all in the world is actually empire of climate. That people, the law, the choice of professions, even the choice of habitat, a residential area where they live, the clothing and what have you, the behaviors is actually dictated by the climate. And long after Montesquieu was gone, now it's all rings through. And we experience a lot of changes, big changes, and we face a grand challenges of climate adaptations. And what we do in developing geothermal resources, in strengthening our commitment to sustainability, for example, that is also to a certain extent responding to climate dynamics that we have. And that's the reason why I introduce you to what Montesquieu thought long time ago. And since it's been a long time and it's ring true, come to the point that essentially when we talk about climate adaptations, energy transitions, for example, it also goes on a long-term view as a grand challenges. That include also the sustainability. That is complex, uncertain, and it's also cutting across multiple boundaries, multiple topics, multiple jurisdictional boundaries that requires participations of all parties, that it could also be understood and meaningful to all the parties as well. And it relies on a distributed experimentation. That means no one can have all the solutions. Right? So in that thinking, then I would argue that when we develop the geothermal businesses, it is also for a long-term view in our contribution to sustainability. But the focus is really, first of all, internally in the organization, and how can we build an adaptive and resilient organizations? how can we build an adaptive and resilient businesses. And only then we could contribute, we could create shared values, and it's also contributing toward sustainability in the long term, right? There are 4 points here that we're going to go through one by one. So first of all, that in building resilience, for sure, we have to look deep inside and identifying and using the authentic modality as our strength. And why it is authentic modality is because it's very, very important that we source our strength really on what is unique about us and our core capability. One of this authentic modality, for example, that we identify out loud and focus to use it and to expand it in Pertamina geothermal energy was the people. That people with their experiences, their capability are one of our authentic modality, and we have to be able to turn that into our strength. And then with people as one of the authentic modality, we go on building additional capabilities, which is basically how can we respond and how can we adapt to the dynamic of the world around us. Instead of a very topical, we choose to use a systemic approach or holistic approach. That means we step back and step up and take it all, right? With all the parties, all the partners, all the forces who are surrounding us. And also, instead of avoiding the uncertainty and try to make everything certain, it's embracing uncertainty and work with scenarios. So with that, to start with that, because the look is a long term, it has to be embedded in the very core values that we have as a person and as an organization, and that's additional authentic modality is the values and belief that we have, because it will affect our perceptions, the goals that we want to achieve, and also the choice of actions that we do. So it is very, very important that we have good alignment between people and the organization on values, on purposes, then translate all of that into actions, which falls into the behavioral categories, right? And in that sense, sustainability and how we can contribute long term by creating values to people around us, to community around us, and also to the environment is by embedding that into our values, right? And deliberately in doing our business, we focus on not only creating value for our own organization, our own people, but it's also creating meaningful values for others around us, be it the community around us, be it the business partners, be it the natures, the environments, or the countries, or the area where we are working with. The next, we look into building the resilience by using adaptive capability as the building block for resilience. So being adaptive, looking into the way human being operates in the world, consists of two key elements. One is the capability of being alert. And second is a capability to be responsive based on the event or based on the unfolding triggers that is in front of us. Being alert could be divided into two things, right? Alert internally and alert externally. Alert internally is how can we increase the self-awareness about the people, about the organization itself, looking into the modality, looking into the strength, looking into what could we use as either social or psychological capital to help us to deal with the complexity and the work that we have. And externally, it is all about sensing what is coming, and sensing to help us being alert that basically you have to look far ahead and sensitive to things that is not obvious. So of course, to help alert, to have being alert that basically us as an organization, we always have to scan the horizon, and using that understanding to be able to respond differently. And that, if we interacting between insight that we get from the alertness, from scanning the horizons to adjust our response, we turn on the alertness system, the alertness capability on 24/7 is always on, and then modulate our response accordingly. And that's us being adaptive. And again, adaptive here will be the basis for building the resilient. And being resilient, that will help us in running the business, able to produce sustaining good results, sustaining profit, for example, hence able to also sustain the value creation for a longer period of times, regardless of the challenges or the turbulence or the problems that we have in front of us. So that adaptive capability, as we discussed before, is the building block for building the resilient. So what it is that with that capability, the adaptive capability, built-in alertness system, and also responsive capability, any disturbances that hits as a shock, as a trigger, will then enable us to provide provisional response. So we are not going to wait until we have a perfect answers. We're not going to wait until we have the perfect solutions, but we are in the mode of iterative experimentation, starting with provisional response, evaluate, and then come back again with an adjusted response. So that ability to iterate, to start and evaluate, and then modify, and then start again. So that capability is the one that will help us in not only being adaptive, but also being resilient. And when we do that over a certain period of times, we could also incorporate a performance uplift. Essentially, every problem that we face, go through that model of using our adaptive capability, using our ability to sense and gather insight to modify our responses, we will have an uplift in the organizational performance. And that's also uplifting the individual performance as well within that organization. And that will strengthen our resilience as well, because issues, problem, disturbances is essentially growing and multiplying the performance of the organization instead of knocking it down. So that's the idea of focusing on building the resilience. We are not avoiding the problem, but we are using the problem to trigger an uplift in organizational performance. And when we are talking about embedding resilience as a principle to an organizational capability, then there are three different layers that we need to look at, right? The first one, a longer period of time, that's a strategic resilience. That will reside in the stewardship of the board of executive, board of supervisor, or board of commissioner, for example, for 2 tiers organizations. Essentially looking into a long-term view, looking into purposes, looking into a long-term strategy, for example. And then the second layers is on a much shorter period of time. Perhaps we look into on an annual basis with planning, with budgeting, and that will be our operational resilience. That's how we run the operations on a day-to-day basis, right? But what is critical to the successes of building this resilience as an embedded organizational capability is actually on the third layer, which is on a day-to-day basis. This is on individual level. So the organization will only be resilient if every single individual is also being resilient. So these three layers has to be holistically approached, and as the leaders of an organizations, we cannot just stay at the top level, which is at the strategic level, looking long-term view only. No, we have to be able to be present and making an impact also at the operational level. And also, importantly, it is on the individual level, influencing every single person, every single individual within the organization. The time frame are different. Individual, they have to be adaptive. They have to build that resilience on a day-to-day basis through day-to-day activity, solving problem of the organizations. Operational resilience, building that capability on a slightly longer basis. We look and referencing our activity on annual plan, for example, or annual budget, and that together will help building embedded organization capability that will have adaptive response and resilient for longer term. And we said as well that the other element is that embrace the uncertainty and work with scenarios. And this is also interesting to see, because then this could be the basis of an argument that we should focus beyond just ESG as we know it today, right? Environment, social, and the governance, as if that's the only elements that we have to pay attention to. However, when we look into the whole system, and today, for example, with current knowledge, current thinking and practices, we have the trajectory going to the future. Actually, we are entering into a dynamic system with multi-parties being involved, multi-actors, and also the presence of forces. And some of them, we call it structural forces, meaning just like structures in a building, if that forces, the structural forces plays, or there are interplays between these forces, the whole system is going to be affected, right? We experienced that with the pandemic, for example. So climate change, that is one of the structural forces. So there are a lot of uncertainties in the future, how things are going to unfold, what will be the outcomes, and hence we have to prepare that we will not have only a single trajectory going forward in the future. If we take into account that structural forces, there plausibly be more than one trajectory. And that is very, very important reference point. And that's very, very important contextual thinking, because instead of avoiding uncertainty or making things certain, that is a way to help us in coping with uncertainty and paying attention to forces, to factors who are beyond our control. And using that understanding of plausible multiple trajectories as a feedback to help us learn new things, unlearn what is not relevant, and relearn again. And then we continue our trajectory going forward with adapted knowledge, thinking, and practices. It is very, very important for an organization to start building resilience by challenging the current assumptions, challenging the way we think, challenging the way we do things, and see if there are ways to do things differently, so as we have the opportunity to have a different result of a different outcome. A while back, I did a little research with the young professionals. It's not that many, and asking what are the forces that might shape the climate adaptation and energy transitions in the business sectors. And as we see here, the size of the circle represent the number of forces that this young professional considers, right? So say 25% of all the factors, the forces that this young professional considers are in economic grouping. And then the 22% on technologies, and there are socio-culturals, there are legal, there are political, and there are environment as well, right? So it's very, very clear here that definitely what we are facing is more than just issue in an environmental aspect, in a social aspect, and also in terms of the governance. But there are multitude of other factors, other forces that we have to pay attention also. So then when we focus on sustainability long term, when we also look into embracing the whole systemic view, then we are open to consider all of these factors, all of these forces that are around us and the interplay between them that might affect the way we do business, that might affect the environment where we do business, that might affect the people that we are doing business with, right? So those considerations will help us in taking into account the uncertainty of the future, the possibility of having multiple future trajectories, and then make adaptive adjustments in moving forward and continue developing our activity and our businesses. And the last part here, before I hand it over to Alex, is the role of leadership. I'm just borrowing the definition of sustainability leadership from Cambridge Institute of Sustainable Leadership. It is essentially individuals who are compelled to make a difference. That's a purpose. By deepening their awareness of themselves in relations to the world around them. And in doing so, they adopt new ways of seeing, thinking, and interacting that result in innovative and sustainable solutions. So let's see how we embed that principle of leadership into framework that we have been discussing. Deepening awareness of self and the world around. That is essentially why we have to build that capability to be alert, sensing what is around us, but it's also sensing internally. If it is a person sensing internally, what is our fear, what we fear about the futures, what is our strength, for example, and the same thing with an organization. Deepening awareness about the authentic modality, the strength of an organization, the competitive advantage that they have, for example, that will help us in better position ourselves in relation to the world around us. And deepening awareness about the world around us would help us in having a better sense and able to create a meaningful understanding of all the parties around us and help us in shaping a more meaningful relationship also with them. And we have a meaningful relationship, we have the opportunity to create a meaningful values for others. Adopt new ways of seeing, thinking, and interacting, and to have a possible innovative solutions that is more sustainable long term. So that methodology of deliberately looking into all the forces, all the factors, actors, especially the one beyond our controls, outside our sector, for example. However, the interplay, the dynamic between those forces might greatly influence the way we do business or might influence our sector of businesses, our company, our organization, for example. That will help us in being able to see what is not normally seen, to see the different pattern, to get an insight, connect the dots, for example, and we have the ability to formulate a different way of doing things that will help us in having the opportunity or having the chance to have a different outcome. So in a sense, when we are talking about sustainability and how the geothermal community, geothermal company could contribute by continuing developing geothermal as the source of renewable energy, helping in reducing the climate impact and helping in climate adaptations. It has to be purposeful intention that is embedded in the value and the purpose of the company. The capability that we built beyond ESG is essentially calling to build a resilient capability embedded in a core business and centered on building adaptive and then resilience on the people. And it has to be systemic and long-term instead of just looking into annual basis or much more shorter time frame. And in the end, Alex and everyone, if we met Montesquieu at the beginning, now we met John Keats. He's a romantic poet from England, around 1700 also. And he says that we need to build a unique kind of capability. And this is called a capability to be in uncertainties, to be in mysteries, to be in doubt without irritating reach, to have certainty, to have fact, and to have the exact answers. We face a lot of uncertainty in developing geothermal going forward. We face a lot of uncertainty in dealing with the climate adaptations. However, if we have that capability in mobilizing actions amid uncertainty, I think the world is in a better shape in the future. Alex, back to you. Thank you.
Wow, very interesting presentation and take on leadership here for companies. And I have a ton of questions and thoughts, and maybe you can leave your slide on for the moment. But I'm trying to structure this in a form. So what is interesting for I guess for all of us that work in geothermal, that we are very passionate about the industry and the role what geothermal can play, and where that for the greater role of our work towards mitigating climate change. So the question, of course, in the sense of purpose and values in companies. How do you think it is important to channel that passion with regards to then the capabilities, the resilience, and the people? Because what we see a lot is that you have so many purpose-driven people in those geothermal companies that they sometimes forget maybe about some of the aspects that built in sustainability. And how can leaders deal with that? Could you comment on that a little bit?
Alex, that's interesting questions. And indeed, it's very important. Hence, what I'm saying here is the importance of the alignment of value and purposes between people and the organizations. And the role of leaders is to be there to help in the process, which is called meaning making. It's essentially having a discussion, having interaction with the people to be able to see that their purposes, their passions, their belief, and their own personal missions could actually be channeled and part of a corporate objective as well. And oftentimes, very little discussions on a very practical level in terms of value alignment, right? And one thing that I have tried in different occasions in other organizations as well, not just in Pertamina Geothermal Energy, is focusing on what people do on a day-to-day basis, and then help them to map it out into a bigger purposes, right? Because contributing to adapting to climate change mitigation, for example, or sustainability, it has to be practical and meaningful so that they could see, right? Because if we put it as too big of an impact, for example, too big of a goal, then people might see that they are quite powerless to be able to contribute. And if they could see that on their own personal level, what they do means a lot, and they are part of a bigger thing, that could help them in aligning and actually fueling more of their purposeful actions toward a bigger purpose together with the company, right? And that requires interactions, that requires a dialogue, that requires a conversations with the people. And that is an element, for example, Alex, that I committed to allocate a lot of my time in doing that individual discussions, be it in the office or being outside. In Pertamina Geothermal Energy, I have a habit of having a conversation with a night shift, Alex. right? With the operator running the power plants, visited them right at midnight, make sure that they feel that they are important, that they are also meaningful within the bigger scheme of it, and having a meaningful conversation with them, and help in answering their question, help answering their doubt, and help also aligning what they do with the bigger purposes. I hope I answered your questions.
You did, you did. And then maybe taking this a little bit further, and of course, people ask here about certain specific geothermal companies, and of course, it's difficult to comment on that, I would assume. But I think in the geothermal world, and particularly with developers, I mean, taking Pertamina as an example, but also then in other countries, we find that a lot of the, let's say, the larger geothermal companies are nationally owned or owned by the government. And in that context, I guess also because you mentioned long-term thinking in the process, and of course that is super important. But we often find that this long-term thinking in the political side of things is very tricky. And with that, I guess there has been a lot of uncertainty built in to the geothermal sector in Indonesia and elsewhere because you're depending on, let's say, certain legislative measures or support schemes, etc. And with these uncertainties, also that translates then in uncertainties for the companies working in the sector, right? So the question is basically on how do you deal with this in the leadership of the company so that the people continue to work throughout these uncertainties and you as a manager or board in the intermediary role that you play, that you support both sides in the sense of creating the long-term vision and certainty for the company going forward.
That's another excellent question, Alex. Let me try here, and it is also a conversation, right? So please feel free to also bring your thought on the table as well, Alex. Right? It is interesting in a sense that yes, it's very true. The uncertainty is very high. So one thing that we do is to be very cognizant and very clear in adjusting the way we think. That any geothermal business, any geothermal operation is not just about the technical aspect of a geothermal resource development, right? But it is a business, and it has an environment, it has an ecosystem with multi actors and multiple factors that play, as indicated in the slide that I mentioned before, right? When we canvass people, when we ask people to what are the factors that might influence the dynamic of climate adaptation, energy transitions. There are, of course, a political aspect. There are legal, which consists of regulatory landscape and also the policies of the government. If we have that awareness that those are part of the uncertainties, then at least you tune in, and that changes your alertness, right? And based on my experiences, not just with Pertamina Geothermal Energy, but with other organizations that I've been with, the team will be able to get the support in managing their fear, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of unknown, if they see also that the organization has a different level of alertness, has a different level of sense on what's going on around them in terms of the context, like in terms of the big picture, right? And that ability to deal with the doubt and the fear of the future, of the uncertainty, will increase further if they see the capability of the management or the organizations to be part of the conversation of all those big issues, right? And the confidence will even be higher if they could see that the company are not working alone, but they see that the company is also participating in a community, partners with others, partner with the governments, and able to influence some changes. And when they see that, even though the uncertainty is not gone, it is still there, but people will have what normally is called technically as workable certainty. So it's a point of reference that is not 100% certain, but it helps us to move forward. And that is the role of leader, is actually to provide a workable certainty, something that is touchable, something that is practical, that people will be able to use as a point of reference to pull them forward against the fear of unknown. And it is also a moving pole, right? That from time to time we move that workable certainty, we move that point of reference going forward. It might take time, it might take other parties to contribute, for example. But what is that sense of progression will also help.
And then maybe as a follow up on that, but I mean, I guess we for every one of us working in geothermal, we always feel that we are so unique and that everything is special about geothermal, about technical challenges, government support, whatever. But I guess in your experience is kind of like, because you described these uncertainties, how different is the geothermal world really in that context with these uncertainties, or are others facing exactly the same things and we just need to learn how to adapt with that better?
Yeah, that's excellent question, Alec. Based on my experience, what is a very very stark was that outside the world of geothermal, in a wider audience, for example, that's my own personal experience, that the unknown about geothermal is very very high, right? So they actually see geothermal with a higher degree of uncertainty than we see the future of geothermal, for example. And what it helped is actually finding commonality with different community or a different elements in the society, right? So it is not focusing on highlighting what is so special about the geothermal, but it's actually helping them to create a meaningful relation with geothermal by finding what is common, what is understandable from that other parties, right? Very recently, I had discussions with the executive director of Indonesia Petroleum Association, for example, right, in seeking collaborative activity. And truly, what helped us getting closer was finding what is common, what could be shared between geothermal and oil and gas community, for example. I've seen the same thing with community, for example. That by the time we find that intersection, by the time we find that commonality, by the time we could then tell a story of a geothermal in a language that they understand, then they find a meaningful relations between them, their world, and a geothermal. And that's what helps, actually. And that is why it is very, very important that that us within the geothermal community too, we are expanding our reach. We are expanding our dialogue. We are expanding our conversations with as many people as possible, and then learning to find multiple intersections or that is possible, or multiple meaningful correlations that is possible with the different parties or different communities. And that is the one that will help us in managing those uncertainty, as well as working better with multiple parties to advance a geothermal development.
Okay, I'm jumping now to a few questions from the audience. Here, the question with regards to the obstacles for geothermal development, kind of in the sense of preparing the workforce, kind of here the education, mentality, environment for geothermal development, kind of how do you manage that in these, let's say, relatively uncertainties for geothermal, particularly with that long-term view? I mean, you touched upon this briefly earlier, but maybe kind of a little bit, expanding here.
Yeah. I'm also involved directly in the university educations for geothermal as well, right? Serving in the advisory board in ITB here, Alex. And recently we had that discussions also on how to prepare a future workforce for geothermal. I think it's a very, very important that as early on we could also explain to that student, to that or potential students, that geothermal is not only about the technical aspect of it, right? There are different aspects that together will build a complete, cohesive, and coherent geothermal businesses, right? And that the geothermal businesses will also need different capabilities. I always argue that we in geothermal communities must expand the definition of core capabilities. In the past, maybe that majority of core capabilities in geothermal is more on GNGs, operations, engineers, but we also have to think about sustainability. We have to think about commercial aspect of it. We have to think about supply chains. We have to think about innovation. We have to think about many other aspects that will make up a very good business organization, right? And that could also be part of contributions toward building an excellent long-term geothermal businesses, and that need to be voiced more and more, right? Including that. The interesting part is that data analytic, machine learning, artificial intelligence use, for example, in a geothermal community, and how we are building the reputations in a geothermal community, how we engage in social media, and all of those will also be interesting to the future talents that we have to attract into geothermal. So then again, explaining, describing geothermal as a much more facets in it, it will help in attracting the talent. And what I've seen so far, I think the education system, for example, in Indonesia is ready to produce a more complete talent capabilities to support geothermal businesses beyond traditional technical métiers, I would say, Alex.
So I mean, and I think that's a general thing that you see at universities. It's like you're moving away from the purely, let's say, specifically focused kind of aspects that you always add some additional things. So let's an engineer needs to learn about marketing and finance
Correct.
as well, just to
Correct.
understand and put this into. Yeah. No, I mean this is great, and this is
Correct.
also
Yeah.
If
If I want to add a little bit into this, is that what we need to do as well systematically is creating or shifting from creating a specialist into specialist plus plus, right? Yeah, we have some core specialists being built, be it a geophysics, be it a geochemist, for example, or a geologist, or a reservoir in a geothermal. But it is a time to give opportunity for them as well to add additional specialties. You know, it will only help if you have a good geologist that also very capable data scientist, right? And these young talent, they have huge capability to learn. And I think systematically we need to design a way of learning, a way of developing them, so as they have the opportunity to have a multiple leg of specializations and creating themselves to be a T profile, right? Having a specialty, but it's also having a universal skill that help them propel them forward, relearning new things, and growing additional leg in their T, which is basically additional specialty. We have people from Pertamina Geothermal who has a basis, who has a geology as a basis, and then learn reservoir modeling, and then learn data sciences, for example. That is basically specialist plus plus, right? That will enrich the impact and also enrich the satisfaction in carrying out the responsibility. We have a finance people learning properly about sustainability, for example. So this effort, I think, if we do that together, it definitely will attract future talents that will help us in sustaining our push for developing geothermal way into the future, Alex.
Here's another question. And of course, having worked for one company it's maybe a bit tricky here to answer. But if you were to describe maybe like one or two role model geothermal companies that you think are particularly good in the whole issue on sustainability, leadership, and resilience.
Well, it's I think it's not going to be fair to pick any of these, and I think the foundation is there in terms of sustainability leadership. We see it in New Zealand, in Philippines, in Indonesia, and also in the US. Do we still have a room to grow further? Definitely, and some progressing using the ESG framework as a way forward. And I'm actually calling to actions. Let's look beyond ESG as well, right? So as we have the opportunity to have a much more bigger impact in a longer term view, and do not limit ourselves where and especially even setting the goal of contributing towards sustainability only limited to ESG assessment or ESG scoring, for example, right, or audit. That is a good thing to start with. That will build a good foundations. I think we all need to move the needle further together and embed that adaptive and resilient capability within the organizations, embed sustainability into the belief system in the organization, and the combination of that will have a bigger impact to the world that is beyond the ESG framework that a lot of companies now are adopting.
Okay, we're running a little bit out of time, so one last question here, specific to Indonesia. Most of the key positions in Indonesia are seated by the Generation X. In some cases, they are reluctant to move from a comfort zone and adapt to, let's say, more disruptive activities of the company. What is your suggestion to the younger generation of employees regarding this?
Well, I think what we need to do as well is creating, first of all, and that is the remit of the leadership in the companies, to create an environment that will give an opportunity for everyone, right? Be it senior or being young, or not just young, in coming out and have their idea heard. Otherwise, based on my own experience, is to make the case. So I tried several times, that basically directly delegating it, or delegating a very, very important task in the company to a young talent or to a young staff member, right? The measure is not what is the prior knowledge that they have to be able to do that, but it's actually how much their appetite to learn and how much their appetite to actually work hard to help themselves in being able to do that, right? We give that opportunity. On the other hand, to help them to come up and move into more risky, more challenging situation, is that the management will also need to have a wider latitude of tolerance to mistakes, for example, tolerance to imperfections. So the goal should not be on achieving a perfection. The goal or the reference point is on progression. I think if we could do that, then we will help people to manage their fear of the discomfort area, for example, and then together moving there, especially if they feel that they will never be left alone in those uncomfortable areas.
Thank you so much, Pak Ahmad. I think we need to cut it short here. Thank you so much for joining us and for your presentation. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will make the recording available at a later stage. Thank you so much, Pak Ahmad, and all the best.
Thank you,
to you.
Alex. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.